Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, you can follow me on X, which would be at Mexico Daily. And of course, I have my personal account where I also do a lot of tweeting, both in English and in Spanish, which is at AM Salazar. And I want to thank all of you who've been joining us throughout the years, especially this weekend. The elections in the United States. It's very interesting, very exciting, somewhat difficult to follow. And if anybody tells you that they know who's going to win in the United States presidential election, they're lying. I mean, the polls seem to indicate that this is a tie. So the we're going to be following almost daily on one of my on my Twitter account, on my X account, just trying to provide you information as to where potentially this is all going. But I can tell you right now, we're not going to know who wins on November 5th. And it could go on for weeks, potentially months. So hopefully you'll keep on joining us here, not only on Living in Mexico, but also on the special production and the special transmissions we'll be doing through X. So thank you once again for joining us all these years. Now, the election in the United States has is always news in Mexico because it does have an enormous impact on Mexico's economy, even Mexican politics. So that's why I really appreciate today's guest. He's in Washington D.C. He knows Mexico very well. He was a correspondent for Bloomberg here in Mexico for years. Now he's in Washington D.C. He is the correspondent for international economics and security. Eric Martin, once again, thank you so much for joining us, Eric. It's so good to talk to you. Let me just ask you, in general, what's the environment, or how is Mexico reflected this time around in the electoral process? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ana Maria. I really appreciate it. It's interesting because having lived in Mexico in 2016 and having just returned to Washington in 2020, Mexico seems to come up in this campaign less than it did certainly in 2016 during Donald Trump's first run for the presidency.
Hmm.
And I think that's in part because his administration negotiated the USMCA, the current trade agreement that replaced the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And so he's already had his opportunity to put, to some degree, his stamp on the relationship. And so when Mexico comes up, you hear about it. You certainly hear about it in terms of Mexico in the context of the border and concerns among both voters, but also perpetuated by the Trump campaign and by Republicans about open borders and concern that there are too many undocumented immigrants crossing the Mexican border to the US, even though the numbers have fallen in pretty much every month this year. There were about 300,000 undocumented encounters last December, which was an all-time record. But they're now at only about 100,000 per month, which is basically the same levels they were at the end of the Trump administration or the very beginning of the Biden administration. So you hear it in that context, but you also hear it in a trade context during the debate and in interviews at rallies. Donald Trump talks about this idea that Chinese companies are setting up plants, building, as he says, gigantic plants in Mexico to export electric vehicles and cars more broadly to the US. And that simply isn't happening. We've spoken collectively at Bloomberg News to any number of experts, and we even broke a story in early September about big Chinese car company BYD that has been a supplier of vehicles in Mexico. You're seeing a lot of BYD cars pop up on the roads in Mexico, but that they were actually delaying their investment, a planned investment announcement in Mexico until after the U.S. election to get past some of the uncertainty around outcomes there, and so broadly, he's been doing this kind of raising of fears and concerns about Mexico and Mexican manufacturers into the US, particularly EVs. Really not the case on the EV front, but it remains an open question as to when he floats a 10% tariff for all of the world, in addition to the 60% tariff on China specifically that he's floated. would that apply to Mexico and Canada, or would the USMCA exempt them from that kind of impact? Lots of open questions about what he will do in terms of trade policy. But he said in an interview earlier this week with Bloomberg News with our editor in chief, John Micklethwaite, he said that he said tariff is a beautiful word. I think he said it's in his opinion, the most beautiful word in the English language. And so, what's certain is that we would be seeing more tariffs, more protectionism if Donald Trump were in the White House.
That hold on. And that is what's so and that's what's so confusing about Donald Trump's position, because on the one hand, he is the father of the USMCA. I mean, he got rid of NAFTA. He negotiated the USMCA with with the Mexican government. So it's hard to imagine him attacking the USMCA. And we should remind our audience that there is a clause in which in 2026 there will be a review of the USMCA, not a renegotiation. That's my understanding, but a review. But there seems to be this idea that if Donald Trump wins, that he would not respect the USMCA, or at least certain parts of the USMCA, by imposing these tariffs. What's your sense about this Trump threat?
Well, certainly, Maria, we were sitting down in our offices last week with Suzanne Clark, the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who was just in Mexico, meeting with Claudia Scheinbaum and leading and participating in a large CEO delegations, U.S. and Mexico CEO dialogue, some 60 plus business executives early this week. And, what she said is that, to some degree, we need to see what is campaign rhetoric, what actually becomes policy. Her feeling, though, is that overall, neither Kamala Harris nor Donald Trump are trade friendly per se. She said that she thinks they're actually both anti-trade. In terms of Kamala Harris, in 2020, when she was still a senator, was one of 10 senators to vote against the USMCA approval at the time. So 90 votes, around 90 votes in favor. Might have been a couple of people missing from the chamber that day, but overwhelmingly passed. Kamala Harris voting against it because she said it didn't have strong enough provisions on environment and climate issues. And so the chamber pointing at that, among other things that make them feel that she would be a continuation of the Biden policy, which has refrained from free trade negotiations. And this really began with, in some ways, with Trump and Lighthizer in 2017 when they came in and were very critical of free trade negotiations. Trump, in the first days of his administration, withdrew the U.S. from the Trans Pacific Partnership that the
Hmm.
Obama administration had painstakingly negotiated with a dozen other dozen countries, around a dozen countries in the Indo-Pacific, and
Including
so
Mexico. I mean, Mexico was
including
part.
Mexico,
Right.
which as you rightly point out, this was people looked at the TPP as a way to update NAFTA, update the rules of trade for North America because both Mexico and Canada are part of it, and they're actually have remained part of the successor agreement. So there's a lot of there was kind of a pivot with Lighthizer and Trump against free trade deals. Biden administration has also refrained from negotiating free trade deals, kind of looking and seeing that the politics have not changed that much, that free trade remains a fairly controversial topic, if not at the national level in the US, then certainly in the swing states needed to win a presidential election. And, so this was the chamber saying, no matter who wins, we don't see these two campaigns as promising a return to what they see as the kind of trade negotiations that have benefited American consumers and families by lowering prices and giving American exporters access to more markets around the world. And so it's trade remains a complicated topic in Washington, both on Capitol Hill and in the executive branch.
You also had a very, what I thought was extraordinary. It was a very interesting interview with Ambassador Tai, who is responsible for negotiating these trade agreements. And during she expressed preoccupation or concerns about reforms taking in Mexico that are now being implemented, constitutional reforms, and that this could potentially impact the trade, I guess, trade agreement, or clearly the trade relationship between both countries. Could you just lay out for our audience what she told you?
Sure. So this was on a trip that we took that I accompanied the U.S. Trade Representative to Coatesville, Pennsylvania, a steel producing town. Cleveland Cliffs, one of the big employers there, about an hour from Philadelphia, an hour southwest of Philadelphia, and we were there for the day, meeting with workers, hearing from the CEO, and basically what she said is that because I asked about Mexico was something that I brought up. She had brought up that USTR has used this rapid response mechanism more than 20 times to go into Mexican
Mhm.
factories and to protect and fight for the right of free association, right of collective bargaining for workers in Mexico, which is also seen as helping workers in the US because it reduces the attraction for companies, as they had done in the past, to move jobs and factories to Mexico because of loose labor rules or because of an ability to take advantage of those weaker labor laws and standards, and certainly lower wages in Mexico. Anyway, I asked her about the new government in Mexico and the final days of the Lopez Obrador administration. What she said is, we've heard from companies who are concerned about, we've heard from companies who have questions about what the judicial reform in Mexico means for them and for the trade relationship going forward. She said she's also has consulted with workers and unions about the labor conditions I just mentioned, and so she's looking forward to sitting down for the first time with Marcelo Ebrard, the Mexican economy minister, her new counterpart, and getting to talk about the vision of the Scheinbaum administration. She referenced to the fact that administrations, it takes time to get things up and running, as was the experience in the U.S. when the Biden administration came in, but that she's eager to speak with Ebrard and her Mexican counterpart soon to figure out what is the scope for cooperation with the new administration. Where do they stand on some of these issues? Because she did hear from the U.S. business community these kinds of questions regarding some of the measures that were taken at the end of the previous administration, particularly in September.
Hmm. Um, wow. Well, I guess, and I know this is a difficult question to answer, but do you have any sense what would be any major changes in the short run, or how different will it be for Mexico's relationship, commercial relationship with the United States, if Donald Trump wins or if Kamala Harris wins? And I ask you that question in terms of thinking about the short term, because we do have the 2026 kind of review of the USMCA. But in the short term, do you think Kamala Harris, President Kamala Harris, or President Donald Trump, their steps or their view of Mexico will be any different?
It would be really interesting, Ana Maria. I mean, it would be speculation on my part right now to really try to guess what things will look like come January 20th when we have a new president in the US.
Hmm.
But Vice President Harris established a relationship with President Lopez Obrador. She made Mexico one of her first couple of stops traveling abroad in 2021 as vice president. She came to the National Palace, and President Lopez Obrador hosted her there. She also hosted him at the Naval Observatory, the official residence of the vice president in Washington. So she really built a relationship, at least personal relationship with him there, probably one of the world leaders she saw more often. And but we also, of course, know that AMLO had what was seen at the time, certainly in 2018 and 19, as a connection, an affinity for President Trump at the time.
Right.
We have reporting that Trump, reciprocated with AMLO, calling AMLO in private, calling him Juan Trump. I mean, seeing something of Trump's own of his own persona, kind of reflected as Trump saw it in AMLO, that Trump thinks of himself as a popular person and was therefore saw a connection with AMLO being certainly one of the more popular at the time of his election, the most supported president in terms of popular vote in Mexico, and seeing him as having a mandate. So it'll be quite interesting to see, where that goes with Trump and Scheinbaum. Also, Marcelo Ebrard, who, of course, has met with Trump at the White House before, met with Trump any number of times as foreign minister, traveling the world because AMLO preferred not to. And so, what role Ebrard will have as economy minister and representing Mexico on the trade front, I think, will be important. The fact that he has a relationship with Trump and with the people who are likely to form potentially part of the second Trump administration.
Well, I guess we won't know. The elections are taking place in 2 weeks. We're less than, yeah, we're about 2 weeks away from the election day in the United States. And like I said, I don't think we're going to know that evening or for a couple days, if not a couple of weeks, who is the next president of the United States. But it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. It's clearly it's a key relationship, and there's the security part of the relationship between Mexico and the United States, and then there's this the trade relationship, which is also extremely important. So it's going to be fascinating to follow very closely the first couple decisions made by the next U.S. president in regards to Mexico. Eric, anything else you would like to add?
No, Ana Maria, I think you said it very well. We know that Mexico is also that the new administration in its first days is trying to align itself with the U.S. vision of weaning North America off of imports from China, for instance. That there's an ambition there to figure out ways to substitute Mexican-made components for the biggest companies importing components currently from China, so things can be more made in Mexico or made in North America, and also Mexican efforts to keep out, Chinese steel that is
Steel?
being dumped on the North American market, to stop fentanyl and to trace fentanyl precursors coming into Mexico. So already in recent years, a lot of work there, and it's something that certainly, no matter who's president, you would expect Mexico to try to continue to find areas of cooperation that are in the benefit of all three countries in North America.
Well, yeah, we didn't even talk about the China component of this. I really appreciate you pointing that out. I really appreciate you joining us today, and it's good to see you again, Eric Martin. He is a correspondent he in Washington D.C. for Bloomberg. He specializes in international economics and security. It's always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And we're going to thank you, Eric. We're gonna go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. You're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Don't go away. I'll be right back.